I think the kids used to run down to the corner where the boy would grab his briefcase and they would walk down the street together talking until they got to their house. While we were doing that little scene, here's something no one ever tells you about Kevin Costner. He is loyal, steady, and almost impossible to upset. Almost. He didn't say anything for years. But 9 Hollywood actors pushed him further than anyone thought possible with their egos, lies, and one sentence that made a friend end a friendship right away. Costner kept these stories to himself for years, but eventually he couldn't keep them to himself any longer. You'll understand why he now calls them the worst people he ever worked with, once you hear what they did. The first person is Marlon Brando, the man who made Gregory Peck lose his cool. There was one name at the very top of Gregory Peck's invisible blacklist that stood out above all the rest. Brando, Marlon, there wasn't a scandal in the news that started their fight. It began quietly in Montana in the mid-1970s when Peck agreed to work on a Western project after the producers promised Brando would be calmer and more professional. Peck got to the set at dawn with the script marked, the lines memorized, and the camera marks already in his head. Brando showed up hours later with a beat-up suitcase that, to Peck's horror, held not only bottles of alcohol, but also 3 pet snakes and a tiny toy piano that he said helped him channel colors into his performance. Brando sat in a corner of the barn set on the first day, hit a few wrong notes, and said, "Today I'm playing this scene in blue." The crew thought it was just another strange thing about Brando. It was the first sign of trouble for Peck. The real break happened during an important conversation. Peck stood where he was supposed to and was ready to give a well-thought-out speech. Brando walked into the frame with a wool cap on and a live pigeon in his arms. He let the bird go in the middle of the take, stared dreamily at the rafters, and forgot half of his lines. The PC froze while the crew watched the mess. When the director said, "Cut," PC walked away without saying a word and later told an assistant, "This isn't acting. This is damage." For the next few weeks, Brando whispered his lines so quietly that the microphones could barely pick them up. Then he went off on tangents that no one else could follow. Peck felt ashamed and hurt. During a tense meeting, he is said to have yelled, "We're here to make a movie, not see an exorcism." Brando just smirked and said, "Maybe your soul needs to be set free." PC thought that Brando was everything he hated after that shoot. A lack of respect for other people's work, selfishness, and chaos. He never worked with him again. Frank Sinatra is number 2. When Hollywood royalty broke the rules, Frank Sinatra, who treated film like a hobby, came in second on PC's list. Their stress reached its highest point in the early 1960s while they were filming a war drama on a California backlot. PC had agreed to work with a co-star who was dedicated to the project. Instead, he found out that Sinatra had his own time zone and that PC was supposed to revolve around him. Peck showed up at 6 a.m. in full costume, with a cup of coffee in one hand and a script in the other, ready to practice. Sinatra usually showed up around noon, and sometimes he still smelled like the nightclub from the night before. The crew would act like they didn't see it. Assistants made excuses. Peck looked at the clock and felt something inside him harden. After yet another delay, he quietly told the director one morning, "If he comes in drunk again, I'm leaving this picture." The real explosion happened during a scene in the hospital that was very emotional. Peck was locked in and giving a calm, controlled performance when he heard a faint whistle. He looked down the ward set and saw Sinatra leaning against a fake bed and whistling a tune between his teeth. When the camera started rolling again, Sinatra was even more rude. He spat on the floor between takes and joked with a grip. "Look at St. Gregory over there, saving souls for the school." Peck held his gaze and clenched his jaw. Sinatra lost it when the director told him to focus. "I have sung at the Palace of Caesar. I know more about feelings than anyone else here." Peck spoke in a low, steady voice. "Frank, this isn't a showroom. We are not going to do an encore. We are telling a story." There was complete silence in the room. From then on, Peck wouldn't talk to Sinatra off camera. He covered up his marks, said his lines, and then turned away. Years later, when asked if he would ever share a set with Sinatra again, he is said to have joked, "I'd rather act next to an empty chair. At least it respects the time of the call." Peck thought that Sinatra was the most insulting person in the business. Richard Burton is number 3. The man who made fun of his soul at a party in Beverly Hills in the middle of the 1960s. Richard Burton chose something much more personal, his moral identity. This is what happened next. Peck came in as usual, quietly nodding to producers and studio heads. Burton came in later, laughing loudly and holding a crystal glass. His voice was loud, as if he were on stage at the Old Vic. Burton's face changed when a friend of both of them said that Peck was the man who gave the world Atticus Finch. He raised his glass and said, "Atticus Finch, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Gregory is not an actor. He's a preacher in a tuxedo. People in the crowd laughed. Peck gave a tight smile, but the jab hurt a lot. Burton kept sharpening the blade for the next few months. He said things like, Greg acts like every scene is a speech to the United Nations. And behind closed doors, he called him St. Gregory, the patron saint of studio morality. It was a campaign. In fact, the breaking point came in 1965 when a European-funded production tried to cast both men as leads. The script was sent to Peck's home in Los Angeles first. He is said to have read 20 pages, put it down, and told his agent, I'll work with anyone, but not with a man who spits on everything I stand for. The project fell apart in just a few days. Burton was very angry and yelled that PC's halo had more power in Hollywood than any of his performances. Burton wasn't just another difficult co-worker for Peck, someone who hated what they saw held up a mirror to him. Calm discipline, controlled feelings, and the idea that movies could mean something. Burton made fun of all of that as hypocritical, and Peck then made a silence around him so complete that it felt like a verdict. 4 is John Wayne. When two Americas collided, the fourth person on the list was not born on a soundstage, but in the harsh world of American politics. John Wayne and Gregory Peck were two different types of Americans, and neither of them liked what the other stood for. Their fight got worse and worse in the 1960s and finally boiled over in public. Wayne, the most famous cowboy in Hollywood, loudly backed the Vietnam War and other hardline right-wing causes. Peck, who played Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird in 1962, signed petitions against the war, spoke out for civil rights, and put his name on causes that Wayne thought were weak. They didn't have to say anything to know they were on different sides. One famous meeting happened in the early 1970s at a Hollywood industry dinner in a hotel ballroom on Wilshire Boulevard. Wayne stood up to give an impromptu toast after a few drinks. He growled, "If this country were full of men like Gregory Peck, we would have given up before the first bullet was fired." Some people laughed while others moved around in their seats. Peck, who was sitting at a table near the back, put down his glass and stood up slowly. He didn't yell. He just said, "If this country were full of men like you, we'd never know what peace is like." Everyone in the room stopped talking. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was a line in the sand. After that night, their lives went in different directions for good. When a studio suggested that Wayne and Peck be uneasy allies in a Western, the idea died as soon as Wayne saw Peck's name on the memo. He is said to have yelled, "I won't ride next to that America hater." Peck, on the other hand, turned down invitations to events where Wayne was going to be. There were no fights or yelling on set, just a cold hatred that never really went away. Peck is said to have said privately when Wayne was dying in 1979, "I pray for his soul, but I still can't look him in the eye." Kirk Douglas is number 5, the opponent who always compared. Last on this list, but just as bad, was Kirk Douglas. He made their whole careers into a long, slow race. Douglas was loud when PC was quiet. They were always going to fight, even if they didn't do it in person very often. By the end of the 1950s, both men were very famous. Peck had Roman Holiday and the Guns of Navarone. Douglas had Paths of Glory and Spartacus. Douglas rarely missed a chance to make fun of Peck when reporters asked him about his peers. He shrugged and said, "Gregory Peck is as stiff as a board." In one interview, "I'd rather break than stand up that straight." The quote spread like wildfire in the business world. The tension grew even more in 1963 when Peck won an Academy Award for To Kill a Mockingbird. When the crowd at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium stood up to clap, Douglas sat further back with a drink in hand and was said to have been mumbling to those around him. This town wouldn't be full of hypocrites if he were really Atticus Finch. Within a few days, Peck heard back about the comment. He didn't say anything in public, but a wall went up. Years later, when Columbia Pictures suggested casting both men in the same World War II resistance movie that was being filmed in Norway, Peck read the proposal and quietly told the director, "I don't want to share the frame with a man who thinks volume is a substitute for truth." Douglas found out about it and went off, calling Peck a hypocrite with a halo and saying that his rival was just a result of clever publicity and studio polish. Their fight never turned into a fight at a party or a fight on the set. It was something that was colder. Two men who were jealous of each other's careers, measuring them, and refusing to admit how much the comparison hurt. After having a stroke decades later, Douglas is said to have softened and said, "Greg was the man I hated, envied, and in the end wished I could be." Their relationship has been great ever since. Now that you know what really happened behind the scenes, which of these actors surprised you the most? Leave a comment and let me know. If you want to know more Hollywood secrets, hit that like button and subscribe.